Okay, everybody, it's 7 p.m. on the dot, and my name is Thea. Welcome to Insight Meditation Community of Charlotte. Tonight, we have a beloved speaker, Mary Aubry, with us, and she will open us with a meditation. And after the meditation, I'll tell you a little bit more about her, and we'll move into the Dharma talk. So I will turn it over to you, Mary. Welcome.
Okay, Thea, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. It's so nice to be with you. So we'll meditate for 30 minutes. I am going to do some guiding during this sit because I think it might be helpful uh, to understand the Dharma talk better if I do a little guiding during the sit. So just sit in a comfortable posture. You might want to give your eyes a rest. And when you're ready, you can just put your attention on the breath to get started. And I've got a bell here with me. I'll ring it at the end of the 30 minutes. But for now, we'll just put our attention on the breath. And if you've had a busy day today or a busy mind today, one thing that I find helpful, especially at the beginning of a sit, is to use an aid to collect the mind. And I usually teach 3 different aids that work for people who learn best either auditorily, visually, or kinesthetically. If you're an auditory learner, it sometimes helps to count the breaths. So in and out is 1, the next in and out is 2. I count from 1 to 8, and then I start again at 1. And I just do that for several rounds to kind of collect the mind around the breath. And if you're more visual or you think another aid might work better, try something visual like an ocean wave coming into shore on the in-breath and going out on the out-breath. If you're kinesthetic, you can use words that can evoke an energy in the body, like peace on the in-breath to calm the inner body, and love on the out-breath to surround yourself with love on the out-breath. So whichever one works best for you to help collect your mind around the breath. And you can just do it for a few minutes. And you can do it as many times as you need to during a sit, but usually at the beginning of a sit, it's most helpful. And if you're counting and you get lost on the way from 1 to 8, you can just start over again at 1. So in and out is 1, the next in and out is 2, and so forth. And then for the rest of the sit, I'd like to get more into the body if we can. And I like to start with the feet. So if you can change your attention from the breath and just let your attention fall down into the inside of one or both feet. We've got the skin around the feet. We've got the flesh just inside the skin. We've got the bones further in from the flesh. And then we might have some spaciousness inside the feet too. So just letting the feet be known on the inside and the outside. If it helps to wiggle the toes to find the feet, do that. You can include the ankles, just letting every part of the feet be known. And then when you're ready, just move up to the lower legs, the calves and the shins, the skin around the lower legs, the fleshy parts just inside, the bones and any spaciousness. And as much as you can, relax these parts as we're going through. So we're going to be bringing them to our attention and letting any stress leave the body, leaving them relaxed and known. And as we go through the body, we'll try to keep what we've already covered relaxed and maybe in the background. So keeping the feet and the lower legs relaxed, and maybe in the background of our attention, we'll bring the foreground of our attention to the knees, the skin around the knees, the flesh inside, the bones, and any spaciousness. Letting any stress in the knee area leave the body. And then we'll keep the lower legs relaxed in the background of our attention, bringing to the foreground the thigh areas. The skin, the flesh, the bones of the thigh areas. and any spaciousness inside. I tend to carry unnoticed stress in my thighs. If that's the case for you, you can just give it any stress in the thigh area permission to be undone and leave the body. So that the whole of each leg is both known and relaxed. And keeping them relaxed in the background, bringing to our attention in the foreground the buttocks, the genitals, letting them be known and relaxed. Kind of imagining the skin, flesh, and bones, and relaxing these areas. And then keeping them in the background, relaxed. We'll move up to the back when you're ready, and we'll start with the lower back, the skin around the lower back, the flesh just inside, bones, and then any spacious parts in the lower back. Being sure to let any stress in the lower back leave the body. The same for the middle back. And the upper back. So that the whole of the back is known and relaxed. And keeping the parts we've covered in the background relaxed. The same with the shoulders, bringing attention to each of the shoulders and lowering them a little bit if we need to. The skin, the flesh, the bony parts of the shoulders, and any spacious bits inside. And then we'll go down the front of the torso, keeping the rest of the body we've covered relaxed in the background. Starting with the chest, the skin, the flesh, the bony parts and spacious parts. And then the diaphragm and tummy at your own pace. Just noticing their gentle movement as the body breathes itself along the way. And then the inside of the torso, all the organs and bones and spaciousness inside the torso, letting any unneeded stress leave the body, so that the whole of the torso is known and relaxed as much as possible. And then we'll keep the whole of the torso relaxed in the background together with the other body parts that we've covered. And we'll go back to the shoulders one more time, re-relaxing those if we need to. And then coming down the arms. First, the upper arms, the skin, the flesh, the bones, and the space inside. And then the elbows, the lower arms, the wrists and the hands, the palms of the hands, the tops of the hands, the fingers, the fingernails, and the fingertips. Just being mindful of the skin around the hands, the flesh just inside, the bones, and the spaciousness. Letting any stress in the hands or the arms leave the body, so that the whole of each arm is both known and relaxed. And then we'll just move our attention from the hands back up to the shoulders one final time, letting them be re-relaxed if needed. And then with the rest of the body in the background staying relaxed. In the foreground, we'll put our attention on the back of the neck. And you can move your head from side to side or up and down to find the back of the neck, the skin, the flesh, the bones, the spaciousness in the back of the neck. Letting it be relaxed. And then little by little, we'll move up the back to the back of the head, starting with the lower part of the back of the head, the skin, the flesh, the bones. And then at your own pace, the middle and top of the head, the back of the head, the middle of the back of the head, and then the top of the head. I always find it interesting to see if I can have an experience of the top of my head without touching it. And then when you're ready, just come down the forehead, the skin, the flesh, the bony parts, and the spaciousness. The temples, the eyebrows, and the eyeballs, the eye sockets, the eyelids. And then you can put your attention to that little dot between the eyebrows, right between the eyebrows, so you can slide your attention down the bridge of the nose to the nostrils and letting it rest right there at the nostrils where the air makes contact as it comes in and goes out. And then the cheeks, the flesh, the skin, and the bones of the cheeks, the sides of the face, the lips, the chin, and the front of the neck. And then for some people, it helps to lower your tongue from the roof of the mouth down to the floor of the mouth, opening up the back of the throat. It's sort of a letting go of having held on. And this letting this one gesture of letting go at the back of the throat kind of relax the entire body, bringing into focus the entire body if we can. Just letting it all be known and relaxed. And then you can just put your attention back on the breath if you'd like for the remainder 5 minutes, but keeping this relaxed body in the background of your attention. So it might be a little different posture than what you're used to, but just seeing if you can maintain a little awareness of the body in the background. It can be a part of the body, like your butt on the chair or the cushion, or your feet on the floor, or your hands. If you have access to the whole body, it's great to use the whole body, keeping it in the background as you rest your attention in the foreground on the breath. And we'll do this for the last 4 minutes now.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary,
You're welcome.
for that wonderful, relaxing meditation. So many of us know Mary Aubry. She has visited with us before, and we are delighted to welcome her back. And hopefully soon we'll see her again in person. But for tonight, we welcome her electronically. So Mary Aubry leads meditation retreats on insight, the jhanas, abiding in emptiness, and the Brahma Viharas. In addition, she has taught programs that support mindfully meeting aging, illness, and dying, as well as training meditation companions for the aging, ill, and dying, and those who love and care for them. Mary also offers meditative support to parents of deceased children, having lost her own son in 2015. Additionally, Mary is a facilitating teacher for Bhikkhu Analayo's online Satipatthana course offered at the Berry Center for Buddhist Studies. And I think she's working on 2 other courses with Bhikkhu Analayo. Prior to becoming a full-time meditation teacher, Mary worked as an attorney for 24 years at the United States Justice Department. And I think it's interesting that she mentioned when we spoke earlier today that all of that work of dealing with complicated laws and distilling it down to present to a jury, she felt like was good preparation for studying the Pali Canon, and bringing the suttas to people like you and me, distilling it down. So please join me in a rousing, silent welcome for our friend and colleague, Mary Aubry.
Oh, thank you so much, Thea. It was such a pleasure meeting you today, and it's such a pleasure being with all of you this evening. I recognize many of your names and faces. Let's see, we've got 2 screens here, so plenty of folks. It's very nice to see all of you, and I recognize many names, and I really want to take time to say hello to you all, but I better get on with the talk. What I want to talk about tonight is right effort. It's something that doesn't get talked very much about. And I want to talk about it in such a way that embodied mindfulness can help us practice right effort. And what we just did in the meditation was getting into the body as much as we could, from the outside in. That's a technique that Bhikkhu Analayo uses, skin, flesh, and bones, to get into the body. And so that we can have an embodied mindfulness. In the case we just did, it was of the breath towards the end. We had mindfulness of the body in the background, and we were being mindful of the breath in the foreground. So it was embodied mindfulness of the breath. And as I'll say here in a little bit, the suttas teach that embodied mindfulness is the key to right effort. So with that being said, I've got a prepared talk here that I'm going to use to speak from tonight, and then I'll take Q&A. And right now, what time is it? Let's see, it's 7:35. I'm going to try to end by 8:15, and then we'll have Q&A after that. If I can end a little early, I'll try to. So, right effort, it's the 6th factor of the Noble Eightfold Path that leads to the end of suffering, right? The Noble Eightfold Path is what the Buddha taught that gets us to the end of suffering. Of course, the Noble Eightfold Path is the 4th Noble Truth. And those four truths go like this. There is suffering is the first one. And suffering falls into three general categories: wanting what we don't have, not wanting what we do have, and clinging to an impermanent mind and body. Those are generally the three categories of suffering. The second noble truth is that there's a cause of that suffering, which is craving for things to be different than the way they are. The third noble truth is that there's an end to that suffering, which is letting go of that very craving for things to be different than the way they are. But because letting go of craving is easier to say than do, there's the fourth noble truth, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. And that Noble Eightfold Path has 8 factors, one of which is right effort, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. But the first factor on the Noble Eightfold Path is right view. That means seeing the world through the lens of the Four Noble Truths. The second factor is right intention. That's having an intention, not to have thoughts of greed and ill will and harm. The third factor is right speech, not lying, refraining from slander and speaking harshly. The fourth is right action, refraining from killing, from taking what's not freely given, and from sexual misconduct. The fifth is right livelihood, refraining from making a living in a way that involves killing or stealing or sexual misconduct or lying. The sixth is right effort, the subject of our talk tonight, which is rousing sufficient energy to do 2 difficult things: abandon unwholesome thoughts and generate wholesome ones. And right effort is also rousing sufficient energy to do 2 even more difficult things, which is rousing sufficient energy to prevent unwholesome thoughts in the first place, not just abandon them, and maintaining only wholesome thoughts in the mind, not just generating them, but maintaining them. So that's a big, tall order under right effort. And those are sometimes called the 4 great efforts. All right, the 7th factor of the 8 factors along the Noble Eightfold Path is right mindfulness of the body and mind. And the final factor is right concentration. So if we want to end suffering, eventually we must get to learn these factors, develop them, and bring them to perfection. But if you haven't perfected all 8 yet, don't despair. Developing each of them is a very gradual process, and it can and usually does take years. So first we learn about each factor, then we begin to develop each factor through our thoughts, our speech, our action, and then we continue to develop them until each one is perfected. And then hopefully, having an awakening experience. So tonight, I'm going to talk about the 6th factor, right effort. So hopefully we can learn a little bit more about right effort, develop it, and maybe even hopefully bring it to perfection. So as I said, right effort is the arousal of sufficient energy to do 2 difficult things: abandon unwholesome thoughts and generate wholesome ones. And it's also the arousal of sufficient energy to do 2 even more difficult things, which is prevent unwholesome thoughts from occurring in the first place, and then maintaining only wholesome thoughts in the mind. . I shouldn't say only. I think you can have neutral thoughts too, along with wholesome for perfection. All right, but this begs two questions. What are wholesome thoughts and what are unwholesome thoughts? In a sutta called The Two Kinds of Thought, which is in the Majjhima Nikaya, number 19, that's the middle length discourses, the 19th sutta, the Buddha said that before his enlightenment, when he was still experiencing suffering, he decided to divide his thoughts into two categories, one for unwholesome thoughts and the other for wholesome thoughts. And so on the thoughts on the side of unwholesome, he categorized them, put there all the thoughts of greed, all the thoughts of aversion, and all the thoughts of cruelty in the categorization of unwholesome thoughts. And then for the wholesome thoughts, on the other side, he said that's where he put his thoughts of non-greed, like generosity, his thoughts of non-aversion, like loving kindness, and his thoughts of non-cruelty, like compassion. And so as these different thoughts arose for the Buddha to be, whether wholesome or not, he classified them into one of these two categories. And he did this with, this is really important, he did this without aversion to them when he saw them. In other words, he didn't judge himself for having them. Rather, he just noticed them. And for the unwholesome thoughts of greed, aversion, and cruelty, he began to understand, according to this sutta, that those unwholesome thoughts led to his own affliction, to another's and to others' affliction as well. He also began to understand that greed, aversion, and cruelty obstructed the development of his own wisdom and caused him difficulties and led him away from the path to the end of suffering. And for the wholesome thoughts of non-greed, like generosity, non-aversion, like loving kindness, and non-cruelty, like compassion, he began to understand that those thoughts did not lead to his own affliction or the affliction of others. He also began to understand that these wholesome thoughts aided the development of his wisdom, did not cause him difficulties, and in fact, led him further down the path to the end of suffering. And further, as he classified his thoughts one way or the other into wholesome and unwholesome, he noticed a pattern developing. He noticed that whatever he frequently thought about became the inclination of his mind. So if he frequently thought about if he frequently entertained unwholesome thoughts, his mind inclined to the unwholesome. But if he frequently entertained wholesome thoughts, his mind inclined to the wholesome. And when he noticed this spurred his energy to abandon the unwholesome and to generate the wholesome. So he became more and more watchful of his thoughts, nudging unwholesome ones out of his mind and encouraging wholesome ones to arise. And he compared doing this, excuse me, I need to let my cat out the door just a second. Or else he would meow the rest of the talk. What I love this sutta because he compares his noticing of these thoughts, the wholesome and the unwholesome, and nudging out the unwholesome and generating the wholesome. He compared that to a cowherd watching his cows in a pasture. And the pasture had both grass, green grass growing, and it also had crops in it that were ripe and ready to harvest. The farmers were ready to harvest those crops. And here's the cowherd watching his cows. And he needed to keep the cows away from the crops that needed to be harvested. He didn't want his cows eating the harvest. So he would tap and poke, the sutta says, tap and poke the cows to keep them away from eating the crops and to encourage them into the green grassy areas of the pasture. After the Buddha said he practiced by, nudging out unwholesome thoughts and encouraging wholesome ones, he noticed that his body and mind became more tranquil and untroubled, and his energy became tireless. He said, with practice, the work of the cowherd didn't seem as hard. Rather, it was more as if the ripened crops had been harvested, and now there was less danger of the cows roaming dangerously close to them and eating them. Eventually, the cowherd could just keep an eye on the cows without having to work so hard, and he could do it more from a distance. So you might try noticing your mind states in this way. Are they wholesome or unwholesome? See if you can categorize them into these two categories. And maybe you can tap and poke the unwholesome ones away and encourage the wholesome ones to thrive. And, tapping and poking a cow isn't like, beating yourself up with the stick for having them. It's just kind of nudging the unwholesome ones out and encouraging the wholesome. And maybe you've heard, many of you probably have, that neuroscience tells us that the mind naturally defaults to the negative. And probably as a set point left over from the hunter-gatherer days when we had to be on the lookout for poisonous food and dangerous animals. So it naturally wants to incline over to the negative instead of being over into the positive. We've got to do something affirmative to get the mind over to wholesome thinking. So otherwise, it defaults over there to the unwholesome. So don't be surprised or alarmed when you notice lots of thoughts of greed, aversion, and delusion. See if you can just be with your unwholesome thoughts like the cowherd. No need to get angry or hate yourself for having them. Just see if you can tap and poke them out of the mind and generate positive thoughts like generosity, loving kindness, compassion, other wholesome thoughts. And it might take more energy when you first start classifying and abandoning unwholesome thoughts, but eventually with practice and seeing the benefit, your energy will become more tireless, like the Buddha was talking about. And you'll be well on your way to developing and perfecting right effort. Sometimes when I'm in the grips of unwholesome thoughts, I'm completely inside them. I can't see outside of them, and I've become completely identified with them. And so representational statements of this might be something like, I am angry. I get identified. I resent him or her. I will destroy him or her. Or I have to have that object over there, greed. Those are representations of greed and aversion. To foster mindfulness of these thoughts, rather than just being caught up inside them, it will really help if we can develop embodied mindfulness of them. This is going to be our best friend with practicing right effort, embodied mindfulness. So embodied mindfulness is the mindfulness of the body in the background, as we are mindful in the foreground of what's going on at the 6 sense doors of the eyes, the ears, the mouth, the nose, the body, and the mind. So just take a moment and see if you can practice embodied mindfulness right now. First, just be mindful of some part of your body, or the whole body if you have access to it. And as you maintain that mindfulness of the body, keep it in the background. And in the foreground, put your attention on the ear door as you're listening to the sound of my voice. Maybe in the foreground, your attention is on the mind door as you make sense of the words I'm saying. But keep your attention of the body in the background. This is embodied listening. It's embodied mindfulness at the ear door and also maybe at the mind door. You can also try embodied mindfulness while you're listening to other sounds. As you see things, you can practice embodied mindfulness at the eye door. When you smell odors or taste, this is a really good practice for eating meditation. You can even be mindful of the body in the background as you experience body sensations, including pain or discomfort or even pleasure. And maybe most importantly, you can practice embodied mindfulness at the mind door with thinking. So in many of the suttas, the Buddha talks about a gradual path to awakening, and guarding these 6 sense doors is part of that path. He says if we leave our sense doors unguarded, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the mouth, the body, and the mind, if we leave them unguarded, we risk being overwhelmed by unwholesome thoughts. And once we're overwhelmed by them, we get identified by them, we get enclosed in them, we can't see out of them, and we sure can't be mindful of them. So we don't want to get overwhelmed by unwholesome thoughts. And the way we do this is to guard the sense doors, all 6 of them. And what helps us best is embodied mindfulness. So with regard to guarding the sense doors, he says, upon seeing a visible object with the eye, we should not immediately grasp at what is seen. But he says, because unwholesome thoughts like greed and aversion can quickly overwhelm us, if we leave the eye door unguarded, we should guard it, protect it, and develop restraint so that we can be mindful of at the eye door. And he says the same with regard to the rest of the sense doors as well. With regard to the sounds we hear, the odors we smell, the tastes we taste, the body sensations we feel, and the thoughts we think. Most of the time, we don't do this. We don't practice restraint at the sense doors. Rather, we quickly become engulfed in whatever we're experiencing, and we leave the doors wide open to greed and aversion and delusion. We forget our mindfulness. We get overcome by unwholesome mind states, get identified with them, and we act from that place. We speak from that place. We let our mind run rampant from that place. In a sutta called the Simile of the Six Animals, which is in the Samyutta Nikaya at 35.247, the Simile of the Six Animals, the Buddha says embodied mindfulness is the key to practicing restraint at the six sense doors. In this sutta, the Simile of the Six Animals, he likens the six sense doors to six wild animals with different domains and different feeding grounds: a snake, a crocodile, a bird, a dog, a jackal, and a monkey. And in the sutta, a man catches each of these animals and ties each one to a very strong rope, and then ties the ropes together with a knot in the middle. And then he releases them. The sutta says, upon releasing them, with them tied together with this knot in the middle, those six animals with six different domains and six different feeding grounds would each pull in the direction of its own feeding ground and domain. The snake would pull one way, thinking, let me enter an anthill. The crocodile would pull another way, let me enter the water. The bird would pull another, thinking, let me fly up to the sky. The dog would pull another, thinking, let me enter a village. The jackal would pull another way, thinking, let me enter a burial ground. And the monkey would pull another way, thinking, let me enter a forest. And the sutta goes on, when these six animals become worn out from pulling and tugging against each other and fatigued, they would become dominated by the one of them that was the strongest. This happens in our mind all the time. And they would submit to it and come under its control. So too, the sutta says, when we have not developed and cultivated embodied mindfulness. So right now, maybe you can be mindful of your body in the background while you're listening in the foreground, so you can kind of get a little practice with embodied mindfulness. It says, when we have not developed and cultivated embodied mindfulness, the eye pulls in the direction of agreeable sights and away from disagreeable ones. And the ear pulls in the direction of agreeable sounds and away from disagreeable ones. And the same with the nose, with odors that are agreeable and disagreeable. And the same with tastes that are agreeable and disagreeable. And the body in the direction of agreeable sensations and away from disagreeable ones, and in the mind in the direction of agreeable thoughts and away from disagreeable ones. The Buddha said it is in such a way that there is non-restraint at the six sense doors. And then he said, and how is there restraint? And then he answered his own question. He said, upon experiencing sense objects at one of the six sense doors, one is not pulled towards agreeable ones or repulsed by disagreeable ones if one is practicing restraint. Rather, one establishes embodied mindfulness and practices restraint at the six sense doors with embodied mindfulness. So again, I'll just suggest and invite you to return to the body, to practice embodied mindfulness in the background as you're listening at the ear door in the foreground, and maybe at the eye door while you're making sense of the words you're hearing. Just practicing embodied mindfulness in the background. And then the Buddha said, suppose a man would catch 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds just as before, but instead of tying them together with a knot in the middle, he would tie them to a strong post or pillar. And then, just like before, initially, those 6 animals with different domains and different feeding grounds would each pull in the direction of its own feeding ground and domain. But eventually, they would become worn out and fatigued. They would stand close to that post or pillar, and they would sit down right there and eventually even lie down. So too, when one has developed and cultivated embodied mindfulness, the 6 sense doors do not pull in the direction of agreeable sense objects or away from disagreeable ones. This is restraint of the 6 sense doors. And the Buddha said the strong post or pillar in the story is a designation for embodied mindfulness. Therefore, you should train yourselves thus, he said. Develop and cultivate embodied mindfulness. Make it your vehicle. Make it your basis. Stabilize it. Exercise yourselves in it and fully perfect it. This is how you should train yourselves to exercise restraint at the 6 sense doors. So again, I'll just invite you to come back into the body in the background. I try to speak from this place, try to remember to speak from this place as often as I can, and to listen from this place. Let alone, be mindful of the other doors as well. But it's good practice while speaking and listening when you're off the cushion. Look for opportunities to practice it. You can do it on the cushion, just like we did in the guided meditation, by being mindful of the body in the background and while you're being mindful of the breath in the foreground. You just divide your attention a little bit, but maintain awareness of the body in the background. You can also practice embodied mindfulness while you're walking. Imagine that. You're mindful of the body while you're walking. Normally, we're all engrossed in our thoughts while we're walking. What would it be like if we were in the body while we were walking? Mindful of the body while it's a whole different experience. To have your mind and body doing the same thing. While you're walking. I highly recommend it. So most especially, see if you can practice embodied mindfulness while practicing right effort. With mindfulness of the body in the background, see if you can categorize your thoughts into wholesome and unwholesome, abandon the unwholesome, and generate the wholesome. And for a more advanced practice, with mindfulness of body in the background, you might see if you can figure out how to prevent unwholesome thoughts from arising in the first place. At least do it for a short period of time. And for a short period of time, see if you can maintain wholesome thoughts in the mind. And you can extend those time periods as you get more practice. I like a 3-part prescription that was given by a Buddhist nun named Ayakema. She taught this 3-part prescription that really dovetails nicely into a talk on right effort. It doesn't include the embodied mindfulness part, but it's still worth mentioning. She says, number 1, recognize when you're having an unwholesome thought. Number 2, don't blame the trigger. And number 3, replace the unwholesome thought with a wholesome one. This is a gradual teaching in and of itself. Each one of those three is progressively more difficult. In fact, if all you could do was the first one, you'd be doing really good. Recognize when you're having an unwholesome thought. Like I said, usually, when I'm angry, I'm inside my anger. I can't see outside of it. I'm completely identified with it. And I act from that place. I'm not mindful of it. But if I could do the first thing of what Ayakema is suggesting, it would go a long way towards easing my suffering. Recognize when I'm having an unwholesome thought. Just get a little distance from it. Right? Oh, this is just anger. That's the first one. And that's huge right there. And then the second one is don't blame the trigger. We love blaming the triggers of our lives. This is a more advanced step, but it's very helpful to right effort. We really want to blame our suffering on others or other situations. We fail to see that our suffering comes from the craving in our own mind. The third prescription, replace the unwholesome thought with a wholesome one. This can be any of the Brahmaviharas, the paramis, the awakening factors, any mind states that are wholesome. Generosity, gratitude. So that's the hardest of the three, replacing an unwholesome mind state with a wholesome one. But if you can practice all three, they really bring you to a place of peace in the mind. I was saying that we like to blame the triggers, but and we fail to see that the craving is in our own mind. In a way, that's the good news, that our suffering isn't out there, it's in our minds, because we have influence over our minds. We can tap and poke unwholesome thoughts away. We can learn how to do that. And we can generate wholesome thoughts. We have little, if any, influence over the external triggers in our lives. And when we can develop embodied mindfulness, we can learn to recognize when we're experiencing unwholesome thoughts more easily. And with that suggestion, I'll just ask you again to return to your body in the background as you're listening in the foreground, just to continue to see if you can develop your embodied mindfulness. Maintaining embodied mindfulness helps us to create an anchor on and off the cushion to stay mindful. I read a story once by a nun. She said she got all the way through her path just by staying in the body, and she became awakened. So with embodied mindfulness, we can learn to recognize when we're experiencing unwholesome thoughts. We can learn not to blame the triggers in our lives, and we can learn to generate wholesome thoughts. With embodied mindfulness, we can practice restraint at the 6 sense doors. With embodied mindfulness, we can get the wild animals at our sense doors to calm down and eventually lie down. With embodied mindfulness, we can learn to develop and perfect wholesome mind states in real time when we need it. States like generosity instead of greed, metta or loving kindness instead of anger, compassion instead of cruelty, mudita which is a Pali word meaning happiness for another is good fortune. We can develop mudita instead of jealousy or envy in real time. Equanimity instead of delusion. Patience instead of impatience. Gratitude instead of resentment. Joy instead of sorrow. Investigation instead of overwhelm. These are some of the awakening factors. Tranquility instead of restlessness. Energy instead of fatigue or laziness. So just to close, I'd like us to get a little more practice with embodied mindfulness at the six sense doors. So this will just take a couple minutes. If you could get into a comfortable posture, and just put your attention on the breath to get started. And you don't have to be mindful of the whole body if you don't have access to the whole body. It takes practice to get the whole body. But maybe just your butt in the chair or your hands or your feet. And just keeping a part of the body in the background. Notice what you're experiencing at the ear door. The sound of my voice, but maybe there are other sounds. Keep mindfulness of the body in the background as you listen. And then practice restraint by noticing and being mindful of any like or dislike at the ear door. So rather than being absorbed into the reaction, you're being mindful of it. Using the body in the background as an anchor for your mindfulness. And then you might try this with the eye door. Maintaining mindfulness of the body in the background. Just open your eyes a little and look around where you're sitting at something. Keeping mindfulness of the body in the background. You can practice restraint at the eye door by noticing any reaction of like or dislike to what you're seeing, rather than being absorbed in the reaction. Just notice your reaction. Rather than being the reaction. And then we'll close the eyes again and see if we can do this with the body door. So be mindful of the body in the background. And then see if there's an experience of a sensation in your body. And you can practice restraint at the body door by noticing any reaction of like or dislike. Using mindfulness of the body in the background as an anchor. So that's a little practice with embodied mindfulness at some of the six sense doors. And I'll end this talk here.